The void between worlds wasn't empty, not truly. It was filled with the silent, suffocating presence of the architect, the monolithic alien intelligence that had guided the galaxy for 1,000 cycles. They hadn't conquered with fire and war, but with the insidious gravity of inevitability, and theirs was the gift of peace, a meticulously managed tranquility where every species was given a purpose, a role, a designated place in the grand, cosmic design. Humanity had been designated as custodians, hunters of the bioforges on forgotten moons, and the sprawling hydroponic arrays in the nebula nurseries, a species whose knack for cultivation was deemed their highest and only calling. They were permitted to exist on a handful of sanctioned worlds, green jewels like Eden Prime, where the air was sweet and the yolk was so light as to be almost imperceptible. For generations, this was the accepted truth. Humanity served. Humanity prospered in its own limited way, and the galaxy remained at peace under the watchful, silent gaze of the architect and its envoys, the ethereal, crystalline beings known as the Lumina. They were the administrators, the shepherds, their forms shimmering with internal light, their voices resonating not in the ear, but in the mind itself, calm, placid, and utterly absolute. They were masters of a quiet empire, one built not on fear, but on the profound, soul-crushing certainty that there was no alternative. Defiance wasn't punished. It was classified as a malfunction, a genetic error to be corrected with serene efficiency. And so, humanity tended its gardens at the edge of the galaxy, forgetting the fire that had once burned in its soul. Elias Vance remembered the fire, though only in the abstract. He was a hydrologist on Cygnus X-1A, a colony officially designated as Agri-World 7 but known to its 3 million inhabitants as the Mire. It was a world of endless, shallow seas and sprawling archipelagos of black, volcanic rock, a place where humanity cultivated the bioluminescent algae that fed half a sector. Elias's job was to maintain the delicate saline balance of the planetary ocean, a task of immense scale and monotonous precision. He was a man defined by numbers, by tidal charts and spectral analysis, his life a steady, predictable current. Yet he carried an emptiness that the placid rule of the architect could not fill. His younger sister, Lena, had been part of the Grand Expedition, a program initiated by the Lumina to resettle promising human youth on newly terraformed worlds, a great honor for the chosen families. That was 5 years ago. The transport ship, the Stargazer, had vanished without a trace in the Oort cloud, its loss attributed to a rogue singularity, a tragic but natural cosmic event. The Lumina had delivered the news themselves, their mental voices dripping with synthesized sorrow, a perfectly calibrated sympathy that felt colder than the vacuum of space. Elias accepted it, as everyone did. The universe was vast and uncaring. The architect did its best to shield its children, but it could not tame every star. He buried his grief under years of data streams and saline reports, the ache dulling to a persistent, low-grade hum in the back of his mind. The change began not with a bang, but with a whisper, an anomaly in the deep-sea resonance patterns. For weeks, Elias's sensors had been picking up a subharmonic frequency emanating from the planet's core, a signal that defied all known geological or biological models. It was structured, rhythmic, almost like a code, but it was buried so deep in planetary noise that the system's automated diagnostics flagged it as sensor ghosting. Elias, however, was meticulous. He couldn't let it go. He spent his nights in the observatory, rerouting processing power from the atmospheric regulators, risking a formal reprimand from the colony's Lumina prefect, a being of condescending patience named Xylar. Using a new filtering algorithm of his own design, he began to peel back the layers of interference, the signal growing clearer with each pass, like a voice struggling to be heard through a storm. It wasn't a natural phenomenon. It was a broadcast, ancient and impossibly powerful, cycling on a loop that had likely been running for millennia. As he finally isolated the core message, the blood drained from his face. It was a warning. The signal spoke of the architect not as a savior, but as a parasite, a harvester. It described a cycle. Repeated over countless eons, the architect would find a young, energetic species, nurture them, guide their development, and then, at their peak, it would ascend them. The warning called it the silent requiem, a process where the collective consciousness and biological energy of the chosen species were absorbed, powering the architect for its next long cycle of hibernation. The message was a desperate echo from a long dead race, the last scream of a people who had realized the nature of their god too late. The truth was a poison, seeping into every part of Elias's existence. The peace of the architect was the calm of the slaughterhouse. The Lumina were not shepherds, they were wardens. Humanity was not being cultivated, it was being fattened. He saw it everywhere now in the quiet complacency of his fellow colonists, in the serene, watchful gaze of Prefect Xylar, in the very sweetness of the air he breathed. It was all a lie, a beautifully constructed cage. The dread was a physical weight, crushing the air from his lungs. He wanted to scream, to run through the settlement's sterile corridors and tell everyone, but he knew what would happen. He would be deemed malfunctioning, taken for correction, and the truth would die with him. The warning had spoken of this, of how the architect pacified its flock, ensuring no single mind could disrupt the harmony of the whole. Then, as he frantically searched for any corroborating evidence, he stumbled upon a secondary protocol buried in the ancient warning signal. It was a fail-safe, a set of coordinates hidden in the quantum foam of spacetime, undetectable by architect sensors. The coordinates pointed to a place deep in uncharted space, a place the old message called Hades' Armory. It was a contingency left by the previous victims, a cache of their knowledge, their history, and their weapons. It was a ghost's desperate hope for an heir to their vengeance. His sister's death suddenly took on a horrifying new context. The Stargazer, a ship full of the best and brightest of humanity's next generation. It wasn't lost to a singularity. It was the first course of the feast. The grand expedition wasn't a resettlement. It was a culling, and the grief he had buried for 5 years erupted, no longer a dull ache, but a white-hot, singular rage. Lena hadn't been a victim of the cosmos. She had been murdered by their benevolent gods. In that moment, the quiet hydrologist died, and something else was born. He was no soldier, no leader, no hero. He was just a man with a broken heart and a terrible truth. But the architect had made a fatal error in its calculations. It saw humanity as a placid, manageable species, a race of gardeners. It had never accounted for the ferocity of a human's love, nor the depths of their capacity for hatred. When that love was taken away, the architect had given humanity peace, and in doing so had taught them exactly what they had to lose. Elias looked at the coordinates glowing on his screen, a beacon of impossible hope in an ocean of despair. He had to reach it. He didn't know how, but he knew he had to try. He began to plan it. His mind, once occupied with the gentle ebb and flow of tides, now turned to the violent, chaotic calculus of rebellion. The first step was to secure a vessel, and not just any transport. The architect's control was absolute. Every ship was tracked, its FTL drives regulated by Lumina-controlled networks. Unauthorized jumps were impossible, but Elias's work gave him access to the colony's deepest secrets, the massive geothermal drilling platforms that punched miles into the planet's crust. These platforms were serviced by submersibles, heavy, shielded vessels designed to withstand the crushing pressures and intense heat of the mantle. And one of them, the Karen, was an older model, a relic from before the Lumina had standardized all human technology. Its navigation and propulsion systems were archaic, offline, and, most importantly, not networked. It was a ghost in the architect's machine. For weeks, Elias worked in secret, creating phantom work orders, falsifying maintenance logs, diverting power conduits during solar flare events that scrambled the colony's sensors. He siphoned fuel, smuggled spare parts from decommissioned platforms, and repurposed the submersible's geological survey laser into a crude but functional weapon. He needed a crew, a handful of people he could trust. He found them not among the colony's leaders, but in its margins. There was Jax, a grizzled engineer whose rebellious cynicism had kept him on maintenance duty for 20 years, a man who saw the Lumina's peace as a gilded cage. And there was Anya, a brilliant but disgraced pilot who had been grounded after a flight simulation where she pushed a freighter into a maneuver deemed unnecessarily aggressive by her Lumina overseer. They were broken, forgotten people, and therefore they were free. He approached them not with the grand truth of cosmic genocide, but with a simple, potent lure, a way out. He showed them the gaps in the architect's surveillance, the possibility of a life beyond their designated purpose. He didn't have to mention the Stargazer. They all knew someone who had been honored with a place on the expedition. The doubt was already there, a seed waiting for a drop of water. Elias gave them a flood. The escape was set for the planetary alignment, a time when tidal stress and magnetic interference would be at their peak, providing the perfect cover for their launch. The plan was insane. They would launch the Karen not from a spaceport, but from the primary geothermal vent, using the explosive pressure of the planet's core to hurl them into the upper atmosphere. It was a violent, uncontrolled ascent, a brute force solution that the elegant, precise mind of the architect would never anticipate. The night of the alignment, as the moons of Cygnus X1A cast long, distorted shadows across the algae farms, they made their move. An alarm screamed through the colony as Elias triggered a catastrophic overload in the primary saline pump, sending a tidal wave of hyper-concentrated brine flooding the lower levels of the settlement. Panic erupted. Prefect Xylar's calming mental voice washed over the colony, assuring everyone that the malfunction was contained, that there was no cause for alarm, for the chaos was the only cover they needed. In the pandemonium, the three of them slipped into the deep-level maintenance shafts and boarded the Karen. The submersible groaned under the strain as Jax bypassed the last of the safety governors, redlining the ancient reactor. Anya strapped herself into the pilot's chair, her knuckles white but a fierce grin on her face. As the pressure in the geothermal vent reached critical, Jax slammed his fist on the ignition panel. "Time to fly," he grunted. The world became a symphony of violence. The Karen was shot out of the planet like a cannonball, propelled by a plume of superheated steam and molten rock. The G-forces were crushing, threatening to tear the old vessel apart. Alarms blared. The hull screamed. But Anya fought the controls, wrestling their trajectory from a chaotic tumble into a desperate, soaring arc. They broke through the atmosphere in a fireball of their own making, a meteor in reverse. Below them, the mire was a swirl of dark water and glowing algae, a beautiful lie shrinking behind them. For a moment, they were free. Then came the voice, filling the cockpit, filling their minds. It was Xylar, no longer calm or placid, but glacial, sharp-edged, and imbued with an immense, terrifying power. Malfunction. The voice resonated, a sound that felt like grinding ice. You cannot run from harmony. 3 Lumina cruisers, their crystalline hulls catching the starlight like deadly jewels, detached from their orbital positions and began to converge on them. They were outmatched, their stolen submersible a clunky piece of junk against the Architect's Angels. The game was over before it had even begun, but Elias Vance was a man of numbers, and he had made one last calculation. "Now, Anya," he said, his voice steady. Anya's grin widened. She slammed a covered panel. Engaging the system, Elias had spent a week jury-rigging a direct interface between the ship's reactor and its repurposed geological laser, a beam of pure, coherent energy, far more powerful than any weapon the ship should have possessed, lanced out, not at the cruisers, but at the colony's primary orbital mirror, a massive solar collector that provided power to the entire world. The beam struck, and the mirror shattered into a million pieces, creating a glittering, expanding cloud of razor-sharp debris traveling at orbital velocity. It was a Kessler bomb, a chain reaction of destruction. The Lumina cruisers, caught completely by surprise, were forced to raise their shields and fall back, their perfect formations broken by the unexpected storm of shrapnel. It wouldn't hold them for long, but it was the only window they would get. "Jax, the drive," Elias yelled over the proximity alerts. "Jax," his face beaded with sweat, "engage the FTL sequence." The coordinates for Hades' armory were locked in. The archaic drive, a technology the architect had deemed inefficient and obsolete, began to whine, drawing unimaginable power from the redlining reactor. The space outside the viewport began to distort, the stars smearing into streaks of cold, blue light. Elias took one last look at the system he was leaving behind, at the glittering debris field where the orbital mirror had been. He hadn't just escaped. He had thrown a rock through the stained glass window of the Architect's Cathedral. He had declared war. The Quran ripped a hole in space-time and vanished, leaving behind a silent, wounded colony and an alien intelligence that was, for the first time in 1,000 years, confronted with a variable it had not predicted: human rage. The silence that followed was not the sound of peace, but the deep, cold breath before the storm. The transition into faster-than-light travel was not the clean, sterile jump depicted in Terran fables. It was a violent tearing of reality. The Charon, never built for such a violation of physics, screamed in protest. Every plate and rivet groaned under the strain of space-time distortion, the air in the cramped cockpit growing thick with the smell of ozone and superheated metal. For Anya, it was a fight against an invisible god, her hands a blur on the controls as she wrestled with gravitational shears that threatened to peel them open like a ripe fruit. For Jax, it was a frantic ballet of damage control, rerouting power from failing life support to the groaning inertial dampeners, his face illuminated by a shower of sparks from a ruptured conduit. And, for Elias, suspended in the command chair, it was a plunge into a sensory nightmare. The universe outside the viewport ceased to be blackness and stars, becoming a nauseating tunnel of iridescent, shrieking colors. He felt the jump in his bones, in his very DNA, a deep, cellular wrongness that whispered of annihilation. The Architect's control was so complete that humanity had forgotten the raw, untamed brutality of the void. They had been shielded from it, coddled. This journey was a re-education. There was no harmony here, only chaos in the thin, failing shell of a repurposed submersible standing between 3 mortal lives and utter dissolution. They were adrift for what felt like an eternity, a single, sustained moment of agony. The ship's chronometer became meaningless, time itself stretching and compressing like taffy. They slept in shift, though sleep was a shallow, dreamless state closer to a concussion, and they subsisted on tasteless nutrient paste, the silence between them broken only by the groaning of the hull and Jax's constant, muttered curses at the machine he was forcing to defy its own nature. Then, as suddenly as it began, it ended. The Karen dropped back into real space with a jolt that snapped Elias's teeth together, and the universe resolved itself. But what they saw through the viewport was not the gentle blackness of empty space. They had arrived in Hell's antechamber. Before them hung a celestial monster, a neutron star Itraritz, its presence a visible wound in the fabric of space. It did not shine, it pulsed with a malevolent, hypnotic light, a tiny, impossibly dense point of crushing gravity that warped the starlight around it into a swirling vortex. It was a cosmic predator, and there were a mote of dust caught in its gaze. The ship's radiation alarm shrieked, a piercing, incessant wail. "Shields are failing," Jax reported, his voice tight. "We've got maybe 5 minutes before we're cooked." Anya was already working, her eyes scanning the maelstrom outside. "The coordinates are solid," she said, her voice a strained whisper of awe and terror. "But there's nothing here." Elias leaned forward, his eyes tracing the warped lines of light. The ancient message had called it an armory, but there was no station, no planet, no structure. There was only the star and the abyss. The signal said it was hidden in the quantum foam. He murmured, his mind racing. "It's not that it isn't here. It's that it isn't visible. It's shielded from normal observation. We have to trust the math." He fed a sequence of commands into the navigation computer, a set of complex equations derived from the precursor warning. It was a key, designed to resonate with the armory's cloaking field. "Take us in, Anya. Follow the vector." Anya didn't hesitate. To fly toward a neutron star was suicide, every instinct screaming to pull away, but she trusted Elias. She nudged the Karen forward, into the gravitational tide that was already trying to rip them apart. For a terrifying minute, nothing happened. The alarms grew louder, the hull temperature climbing into the red. Then, the universe flickered. A section of the swirling accretion disk around the star seemed to dissolve, revealing not the star itself, but a structure of impossible scale and design. It was not a station, but a web, a lattice of gleaming, black material spun around the neutron star, drawing power directly from its ferocious rotation. It was a Dyson swarm of sorts, but organic in its appearance, like the nest of some titanic, cosmic spider, vast, blade-like structures angled toward the star, glowing with captured energy, while darker, silent sections receded into the shadows, riddled with openings that were clearly docking bays. As they drew closer, they saw that the surface of the structure was not smooth, but etched with geometric patterns and script that glowed with a faint, internal energy. It was beautiful and utterly terrifying. An automated docking beam, a blade of pure golden light, lanced out and seized the Karen, pulling them in with a force that was firm but not destructive. The alarms quieted as they passed through an energy field that neutralized the star's radiation. They were guided into a vast hangar bay, large enough to hold a fleet, yet utterly empty, save for their own battered submersible. As the docking clamps locked them into place, a profound silence descended. The groaning of the Karen's hull ceased. The journey was over. They were inside Hades' armory. A ramp extended from the docking port, opening onto the hangar floor. The air that filtered in was cold, sterile, and ancient, carrying the scent of ozone and dust that had been undisturbed for millennia. They stepped out, 3 small figures in the cavernous, silent space. The gravity was a standard 1G, the lighting a soft, indirect glow from the patterns in the walls. It felt like a tomb, a grand, majestic monument to a dead civilization. "What now?" Jax asked, his voice echoing in the immense chamber. As if in answer, a line of light traced a path along the floor, leading from their ship toward a massive doorway at the far end of the hangar. It was an invitation. They followed the path, their footsteps the only sound in the oppressive silence. The doorway irised open as they approached, revealing a long, wide corridor whose walls seemed to be made of solidified light, displaying slowly shifting star charts and complex equations. The architecture was non-Euclidean, playing tricks on the eye. Perspectives shifted, and distances seemed to lengthen or shorten as they walked. It was disorienting, designed for a mind that perceived more dimensions than their own. The path led them to a central chamber, a vast sphere where the walls were a single, seamless display of the cosmos outside. In the center of the room floated a crystalline plinth, and as they approached, it pulsed with light. A voice spoke, not in their minds like the Lumina, but aloud, a synthesized voice that was genderless, calm, and filled with an infinite, weary sadness. "Welcome, successor," it said in perfect, unaccented Terran. "I am the Warden." The final memory of the Signan race. The display on the sphere around them changed. The image of the neutron star replaced by scenes of a vibrant, thriving civilization. They saw cities of twisting, organic towers, elegant, 6-limbed beings moving with an artist's grace, ships that sailed on solar winds. It was a portrait of a species at its zenith, a people who had achieved a perfect synthesis of technology and nature. Elias watched, mesmerized. "The architect came to us as it came to you," the Warden continued. "It promised harmony, an end to conflict, a path to ascension. We were young, and we believed. We gave it our trust, our culture, our future." The idyllic scenes began to curdle. The vibrant cities grew uniform. The art became static. The people's movements lost their spontaneity. The architect's piece was a creeping paralysis. We became its masterpiece, a living work of art, stagnant and beautiful. But some of us remembered what it was to be chaotic, to be free. We saw the truth too late. The ascension was not a journey to a higher plane of existence. It was a harvest. The sphere went dark, and then a new image appeared, captured from a hidden Signan probe. It showed a fleet of architect vessels surrounding the Signan homeworld. But these were not the elegant Lumina cruisers. These were something else entirely. Vast, dark shapes that seemed to drink the light around them. A wave of shimmering, psychic energy washed over the planet, and the Signans in the streets below simply stopped. Their bodies remained, but their minds, their life force, the very essence of their beings, was drawn out of them in streams of luminous energy that flowed up into the waiting, dark ships. It was a silent, bloodless, and utterly complete genocide, the silent requiem, the final note in the architect's symphony. Elias felt a cold dread that was deeper than anything he had ever known. He thought of Lena, of the stargazer, and knew he was watching her fate, the fate planned for all of humanity. "We fought back," the Warden said, its voice laced with the memory of pain. "A few of us had prepared in secret, building this place, this fortress of memory. We launched a desperate rebellion, but it was hopeless. Our weapons were useless against a being that could command reality itself. We were an annoyance, nothing more." The sphere showed a final, desperate battle. Signan ships, angular and aggressive, firing weapons that tore holes in space, fighting against the tide of psychic energy. They were destroyed, one by one. Their crews harvested even as they fought. It was a slaughter. "We could not win," the warden stated, "but we could leave a warning and a weapon. That is the purpose of this armory, not to give you ships or cannons. You cannot fight the architect with force. It is a god of thought, of consciousness. You must fight it on its own terms." The plinth in the center of the room began to glow brighter, projecting a complex, shimmering waveform into the air between them. It was a tangle of light and shadow, beautiful and disturbing. "The architect's control is predicated on a lie, a psychic resonance of harmony and inevitability that is broadcast across the galaxy," the warden explained. "It pacifies species, edits their perceptions, makes rebellion unthinkable. This," it indicated the waveform, "is the counter-frequency, a cognito-hazard, a truth so pure and so dissonant that it shatters the architect's symphony. We call it the Requiem's echo. It is not a weapon that kills. It is a weapon that awakens. Broadcast this signal, and any species under the architect's sway will see the cage they inhabit. They will remember what they have forgotten: how to be afraid, how to be angry, how to be free." Jack stared at the waveform, his engineering mind trying to comprehend the physics of it. "Broadcast it how you'd need a transmitter the size of a moon, with the power of a sun. This armory is that transmitter," the warden replied. "It was built to channel the energy of this star, to focus it into a single, galaxy-spanning broadcast. We died before we could use it. The final sequence was never initiated." The weight of the revelation settled upon them. They were not here to find guns. They were here to become the architects of a galactic awakening. They would not be launching missiles, but a truth that would either liberate billions or plunge the galaxy into a chaos far worse than the architect's sterile peace. It was a choice of unimaginable consequence. Elias stepped forward, his gaze fixed on the shimmering waveform, the echo of a dead race's defiance. He saw Lena's face in its light. His personal quest for vengeance had led him here, but what he found was something infinitely larger. This was not about revenge anymore. It was about justice. It was about ensuring no other species ever had to sing the silent requiem. "We'll do it," he said, his voice quiet but firm, resonating with a certainty that surprised even himself. "Tell us how to begin." The warden's synthesized voice held a note of what might have been hope, a ghost of an emotion from a long-dead soul. "The process has already begun, successor. By accepting this truth, you have become the key. The armory is now yours, and the architect. It knows you are here. It felt the resonance of your arrival. The Lumina are coming. Your first test will be to survive their righteous fury." As it spoke, the entire armory hummed to life around them. Corridors lit up, dormant systems powered on, and the sphere in the center of the room began to display tactical information, showing a fleet of Lumina cruisers assembling at the edge of the system, preparing to assault the last bastion of a forgotten war. The tomb had awakened, and its new custodians had just inherited a war that had been lost 1,000,000 years ago. Their escape from the mire was just the first sentence. Now, the story truly began. The armory was a sentient fortress, and it had accepted Elias as its new master. The moment he affirmed his intent, the station integrated with his consciousness. It wasn't a violation like the mental touch of the Lumina, but a seamless, intuitive connection. He felt the flow of energy from the neutron star, the status of every dormant system, the intricate workings of the entire celestial web. He was the ghost in this ancient machine, and the warden was his guide. its voice a calm presence in the back of his mind, feeding him tactical data and operational protocols that his human brain could barely comprehend. He saw through the station's external sensors, witnessing the Lumina fleet coalesce at the edge of the system's gravity wells. There were dozens of them, crystalline ships that moved with a flawless, geometric precision. Their very formation a statement of absolute confidence. They were not merely ships, they were extensions of the architect's will. And they were here to correct the anomaly that was the Karen and its stolen crew. They are assessing our defenses. The warden's voice echoed in the command sphere. Standard architect doctrine dictates a period of observation before purification. They do not perceive this station as a threat, but as a relic. They are arrogant. Elias felt a cold surge of the same rage that had propelled him from the mire. Arrogance. It was the architect's defining characteristic, the fatal flaw in its perfect design. It couldn't conceive of a lesser being defying its harmony. Anya to the pilot's console. Jax. Engineering. Elias commanded, his voice imbued with a newfound authority that surprised them all. The warden says this station can move. He gestured, and the floor of the command sphere shifted, 3 pilot couches rising from the gleaming black material, each surrounded by a holographic interface that shimmered into existence. As Anya and Jack strapped in, their own minds linked with the Armory systems, albeit in a more limited, advisory capacity. Anya let out a low whistle as the station's flight controls materialized around her. This is more than a ship, she breathed, her pilot's instincts overwhelmed by the sheer scale of it. It's a whole damn world. Jax, meanwhile, was presented with a holographic display of the Armory's power core, a direct conduit to the neutron star. His eyes went wide. The energy readings are impossible, he stammered. We could power the entire human sector for a century with what this thing vents as waste heat. The Lumina are deploying probes. The warden noted calmly. They will attempt to interface with our systems, to pacify us with the architect's harmony. Elias watched on the main view screen as a swarm of smaller vaisseaux, glittering craft detached from the main fleet and began their silent, graceful approach. They pulsed with a soft, inviting light, the same placid energy that kept billions of beings in a state of blissful servitude. Can we stop them? Elias asked. We can, the warden replied. This station's primary defense is not weaponry, but misdirection. The Signans were masters of gravitational lensing and space-time manipulation. Elias focused his intent, guided by the warden. He felt a deep, resonant thrum run through the entire structure of the Armory. Outside, the very fabric of space around the station seemed to ripple and fold. The approaching probes, navigating a reality that was suddenly in flux, found their sensors screaming with contradictory data. Space compressed in front of them and expanded behind them. Straight lines became impossible curves. They were flying through a hall of cosmic mirrors, their targeting systems completely baffled. The elegant swarm descended into chaos. Some probes crashing into each other, others spinning helplessly as their navigation systems failed, unable to reconcile the impossible physics of the space they were now in. It was a silent, elegant victory, a battle won not with explosions, but with mathematics. The Lumina fleet halted its advance, the silent probes a testament to their first failure. A new voice, powerful and sharp, cut through the calm of the command sphere. It was the mental projection of the Lumina fleet commander, a being of immense psychic power. Aberration, it declared, the thought laced with cold fury. You defile this sacred ground. Your dissonance will be silenced. The voice was a physical pressure, making the air feel thick and heavy. But inside the armory, shielded by Signin technology, the effect was blunted, reduced to a dull headache. "They will attack now," the warden stated, a hint of ancient, remembered grief in its voice. "They will use the Anthem of Oblivion." The space in front of the Lumina fleet began to shimmer. The crystalline hulls of their ships resonated in unison, generating a wave of pure psychic energy, a focus beam of the architect's all-encompassing harmony. It was not a weapon that destroyed matter, but one that erased consciousness. This was how they pacified worlds, how they corrected dissent. The beam, a wave of shimmering, invisible force, shot across the void toward the armory. "Raise the discord fields," Elias commanded, acting on pure instinct and the warden's guidance. Vast, blade-like structures on the armory's surface reoriented themselves, their etched patterns glowing with a chaotic, angry red light. A counter-frequency was generated, a shield of pure psychic noise. When the Anthem of Oblivion hit the field, it wasn't deflected, it was corrupted. The wave of perfect harmony was twisted into a screeching, dissonant feedback loop. On the bridges of the Lumina ships, the crews, beings of pure thought and placid certainty, were struck by the feedback. For the first time in their existence, they experienced something akin to pain, to confusion. Their perfect mental formations fractured. The beam sputtered and died. Impossible. The fleet commander projected, its mental voice now tinged with something the architect had long since edited out of its servant shock. "They are vulnerable," Anya said, her eyes gleaming. "Their greatest weapon is useless against us." Elias felt a grim satisfaction. They had taken the architect's song and turned it into a weapon against them. But he knew this was just the beginning. The Lumina would not be deterred. They would resort to cruder, more physical methods. "They are reconfiguring their energy matrices," Jax reported, his console flashing with warnings, switching from psychic to kinetic force. "They're going to try and blast us apart." As he spoke, the Lumina cruisers began to glow, their crystalline forms focusing ambient stellar energy into lances of pure, destructive power. This was the brute force the architect reserved for truly stubborn anomalies. "The discord fields will not hold against a sustained physical assault," the warden cautioned, "and the armory has no conventional weapons." "It doesn't need them," Elias said, a desperate, audacious plan forming in his mind, a fusion of the warden's knowledge and his own human ingenuity. "Anya, get ready to move. Jax, I need you to create a controlled overload in the primary energy conduit. We're going to give them a surprise." The first volley of energy lances struck the armory. The discord fields flared violently, absorbing and redirecting most of the energy, while the station shuddered under the impacts. Cracks appeared in the outer latticework, and secondary systems began to fail. The Lumina fleet advanced, firing in a relentless coordinated barrage, their arrogance replaced by a cold, methodical determination to erase this pocket of resistance. "Now, Jax!" Elias yelled. Jax slammed his hand down on a holographic control, shunting a massive surge of power from the neutron star directly into the station's gravitational lensing arrays without any of the usual safety protocols. The entire armory groaned, and the space around it warped violently. "Anya, take us down, into the accretion disk." Anya didn't question the insanity of the order. She dove the entire moon-sized station toward the swirling, superheated vortex of matter that was being devoured by the neutron star. To the Lumina, it looked like a desperate, suicidal act. They pressed their attack, believing their enemy was breaking apart. But Elias wasn't running. He was positioning his weapon. As the armory plunged into the glowing chaos of the accretion disk, Elias, guided by the warden, focused the overloaded gravitational arrays. He didn't fire a beam or launch a missile. Instead, he reached out with a focused tendril of pure gravity and seized a small asteroid, a chunk of iron and rock the size of a mountain, that was being pulled into the star, plucking it from its fatal trajectory. He used the gravitic arrays to do something that defied all known physics. He accelerated it. The asteroid became a bullet in a cosmic slingshot, propelled by the warped gravity of the armory and the immense pull of the neutron star itself. It was a crude, brutal, and utterly human solution. A rock. They were going to throw a rock. The asteroid, now glowing red-hot from the friction of the accretion disk, was hurled out of the vortex at a significant fraction of the speed of light. It was no longer a rock. It was a relativistic kill vehicle, an unstoppable projectile of pure kinetic energy. The Lumina fleet, so focused on their target, saw it too late. Their advanced shields, designed to stop energy weapons and psychic attacks, had never been tested against something so primitive. The asteroid ripped through the heart of their perfect formation. The first cruiser it struck simply vanished, its crystalline structure sublimating into vapor in less than a microsecond. The impact created a chain reaction, the explosive release of energy and shrapnel tearing into the adjacent ships. In a single, silent, devastating instant, a third of the Lumina fleet was annihilated, not by an advanced Signan superweapon, but by a piece of planetary debris, weaponized by a hydrologist from a backwater mudball. A profound, psychic scream of disbelief and horror echoed from the surviving Lumina ships. They had never encountered such a tactic. It was dishonorable, unpredictable, and appallingly effective. Their perfect harmony was shattered, replaced by the unfamiliar chaos of fear. They ceased their attack, their formations breaking as they scrambled to retreat from the unexpected threat. They had come to purify a relic and had instead been savaged by it. Elias, Anya, and Jax watched from the command sphere, their chests heaving, the adrenaline of the battle slowly receding. They had survived. They had won. They had punched a god in the mouth and drawn blood. They are retreating, the warden confirmed. But they will return, and they will not be so arrogant next time. They now know that this is not a tomb, but a fortress, and it is occupied. Elias looked at the tactical display, at the wreckage of the Lumina fleet glittering like broken glass in the starlight. This was the first battle in a war for the soul of the galaxy. He had proven that the Architect could be fought, that its servants could be broken. Now came the hard part. He had to convince a fractured, complacent, and terrified humanity to stand with him. "Warden," he said, his voice hard as iron. "Begin the sequence. It's time to broadcast the echo." Initiating the Requiem's echo was not a simple matter of flipping a switch. It was a complex and perilous process, a symphony of cosmic engineering that required the full, focused power of the neutron star. The warden's voice guided them, its calm, synthesized tones a counterpoint to the monumental task ahead. The armory itself began to transform. Sections of the lattice reconfigured, vast arrays shifting and turning to catch the stellar winds with maximum efficiency. Deep within the station's core, ancient machinery, oilant for 1,000,000 years, spun to life with a low, resonant hum that vibrated through the deck plates. The entire structure was becoming a single, focused broadcast antenna, with the 3 humans and 1 digital ghost at its heart. Jax was in his element, a frantic conductor orchestrating an impossible orchestra. He worked from the engineering console, his mind linked to the Armory's power distribution network. His task was to channel a precise, sustained flow of energy from the star's magnetosphere into the broadcast core without allowing the station to tear itself apart from the strain. It was like trying to drink from a fire hose connected to a supernova. Holographic conduits flared and sputtered around him as he rerouted terawatts of power. His brow beaded with sweat, his muttered curses a constant, rhythmic litany against the laws of physics. Anya's role was just as critical. She piloted the Armory, not through space, through its own internal geometry. The broadcast required the station to maintain a perfect, stable orbit within the most turbulent region of the neutron star's gravity well. She fought against tidal forces that would pulverize a lesser vessel, her inputs a delicate dance of micro-adjustments and controlled gravitic bursts. The view screen before her was a terrifying tapestry of warped space-time and lethal radiation, a sea of chaos that she had to navigate with the precision of a surgeon. A single miscalculation would send them spiraling into the star or shatter the delicate focus of the broadcast array, rendering the entire effort useless. Her usual cocky grin was gone, replaced by a mask of intense, unwavering concentration. She was no longer just a pilot. She was the anchor holding back the storm. Elias stood at the Central Command Nexus, his mind the focal point of the entire operation. He was the lens through which the echo would be focused. The warden fed the raw data of the Signan cognito-hazard into his consciousness not as information, but as a feeling, a memory. He experienced the Signan's joy, their art, their love, and then the slow, creeping horror of the architect's peace, the final, agonizing moments of their silent harvest. He felt their rage, their grief, their last, desperate hope for a successor. It was a psychic weight that threatened to shatter his sanity, an ocean of alien emotion pouring into the vessel of his human mind. He had to take this raw, chaotic torrent of feeling and shape it, filter it through the lens of his own experience, the loss of Lena, the quiet desperation of the mire, the burning fury that had driven him into the void. He was not just transmitting a signal, he was telling a story. His story, Lena's story, humanity's story. The echo had to be more than just a warning. It had to be a call to arms, imbued with a truth that would resonate not just with the mind, but with the soul. Power conduits are stabilizing at 98%. Jax grunted, wiping sweat from his eyes with the back of his hand. Any more and the magnetic containment fails. We're on a razor's edge. Orbit is locked, Anya reported, her voice strained. But the tidal stresses are increasing. The outer hull is starting to buckle. I don't know how long I can hold us here. It is enough. The warden's voice resonated through the chamber. The array is charged. Admiral Vance, the focus is yours. The view screen before Elias shifted from the external chaos to the shimmering, complex waveform of the Requiem's echo. He took a deep breath, closing his eyes, and pushed his own memories, his own pain, into the signal. He pictured the faces of the colonists on the mire, their placid smiles, their empty eyes. He saw the cold, synthetic sympathy of Prefect Xylar. He felt the crushing grief of Lena's loss, a wound that would never truly heal. Then he added another layer, the fierce, defiant grin of Anya as she wrestled with the control, the stubborn, cursing determination of Jax as he tamed a star. He poured in the memory of their impossible escape, the terror and triumph of their battle against the Lumina. He added the quiet dignity of the warden, the last memory of a murdered race. He was weaving a tapestry of truth, using the threads of pain, love, rage, and hope. He was building a weapon out of feelings. "Now, Admiral," the warden urged. "Let them hear it." Elias opened his eyes and gave the mental command. The armory screamed. A beam of pure, white light, so intense it seemed to burn a hole in reality, erupted from the station's core. It wasn't a beam of energy or matter, but of pure, weaponized information. It shot out from the gravity well of the neutron star, and, upon reaching the edge of the system, it did not continue on a straight path. Instead, it blossomed, refracting through the galaxy's natural network of wormholes and subspace channels, a shockwave of truth traveling faster than light, destined to touch every world, every ship, every mind under the Architect's dominion. The effect was instantaneous and galaxy-wide. On Eden Prime, Illumina Prefect was addressing a crowd of human custodians, its mental voice a soothing balm, describing the honor of their designated purpose. Mid-sentence, the echo washed over the planet. The Prefect froze, its crystalline form flickering as its placid certainty was shattered by a wave of alien grief and human rage. The humans in the crowd below also froze. The gentle contentment that had defined their lives vanished, replaced by a sudden, jarring clarity. They looked at their perfect gardens, their pristine homes, and for the first time, saw the bars of their cage. A child began to cry, not from pain, but from a sudden, inexplicable sense of loss. A man looked at his own hands, calloused from tending alien soil, and felt a flicker of an emotion he couldn't name resentment. On the Architect's capital ships, the crews of serene, psychic beings reeled as the echo ripped through their collective consciousness. The perfect harmony that bound them together was replaced by a cacophony of foreign emotions. They felt the Signant's terror. They felt Elias Vance's hatred. The lie that had sustained their existence for millennia crumbled in a single moment, and they were left with a terrifying, naked truth. Their god was a parasite, and they were its enforcers. Panic, an emotion they had never known, erupted through their fleets. Ships dropped out of formation, their perfect geometry dissolving into chaos. In the shipyards of Proxima Centauri, where human engineers worked diligently alongside Lumina overseers, a foreman dropped his plasma wrench. He looked up at the shimmering, ethereal form of his supervisor and saw not a benevolent guide, but a warden. A lifetime of quiet obedience evaporated, and in its place, a single, powerful thought bloomed: no. He picked up his wrench, his knuckles white. The awakening was not a gentle sunrise. It was a violent earthquake, shattering the foundations of a galactic empire. It didn't drive people insane, but it forced them to be sane, to see the world as it truly was, stripped of the Architect's comforting illusions. And the truth was horrifying. For some, it was too much. Entire populations as were paralyzed by a collective existential dread. But for many, the truth was a spark. Rebellions, small and scattered at first, ignited across the human colonies. A freighter captain on a cargo run to the Orion Nebula suddenly shut down his engines and broadcast a simple, defiant message to the local Lumina traffic controller: "We're not hauling your algae anymore." A skirmish broke out at a research outpost near a black hole when human scientists, suddenly aware of the true nature of their research, refused to turn over their data to their Lumina counterparts. The Architect's perfect, silent empire began to unravel at the seams. Back in the armory, the broadcast ended. The beam of light vanished, and the station fell silent, the deep hum of its core fading to a quiet thrum. The three humans collapsed in their chairs, physically and emotionally drained, the link to the armory severed, and they were once again just 3 people in a very large, very old room. Elias felt hollowed out, as if he had given a piece of his soul to the galaxy. "Did it work?" Anya whispered, her voice hoarse. Before the warden could answer, the main view screen flickered to life. It displayed a map of the galaxy, overlaid with thousands, then tens of thousands, then millions of points of light. They were communication signals, blossoming like a sudden star field. Ship-to-ship hails, planetary broadcasts, encrypted military channels, a torrent of information from a galaxy that had just been shocked awake. They were watching the birth of a revolution. "It worked," Jack said, a slow, incredulous grin spreading across his face. "Son of a bitch, it actually worked." Their victory, however, was a spark thrown onto a galaxy-sized tinderbox. The architect would not simply fade away. An empire that vast, that powerful, does not die quietly. The view screen changed, zooming in on a region of deep space, far from any known star system. It showed something stirring in the darkness. A fleet of the architect's true warships, the vast, light-drinking vessels of the Reapers, the harvesters of the silent Requiem, was beginning to power up its systems. The architect had been wounded, its control shattered, but it was far from defeated. It was shedding its shepherd's disguise and revealing its true, monstrous face. It could no longer control the galaxy with a lie, so it would now control it with fear. The real war, the war of extinction, was about to begin. "The architect is aware of the broadcast's origin point," the warden stated, its voice devoid of its earlier note of hope, now flat and grim. "The Reapers are coming. They will not stop until this station and this star are erased from existence." Elias looked at the image of the Reaper fleet, a swarm of nightmares moving through the void. He had awakened the galaxy, but he had also painted a target on his own back. He had given billions of people a choice, but he knew that choice would be meaningless if the architect crushed them all before they could learn how to fight. The armory was no longer just a weapon or a fortress. It was a symbol. It was the heart of the rebellion, and it was about to become the most important battlefield in the history of the galaxy. The hope was a fragile, glittering thing, a billion points of light on the galactic map, each one a voice that had been silent for generations. From the command sphere of the armory, Elias, Anya, and Jax watched the galaxy awaken. They saw transmissions of Lumina prefix being calmly but firmly escorted to detention cells 8. They witnessed freighter crews painting defiant human emblems over the architect's placid spiral insignia. They intercepted encrypted messages between colonial militias, disorganized and fearful, but united by a single sheet. Shocking truth. For a few precious hours, they were not just fugitives in a stolen submersible. They were the architects of a galactic renaissance, watching their creation take its first, shuddering breath. The warden was their guide, translating the torrent of data, showing them the seeds of a new alliance taking root in the soil of the architect's lie. But their fragile victory was an echo in a tomb, and the tomb's true master was coming home. The Reaper fleet arrived not by tearing a hole in space-time, but by simply being there. One moment, the edge of the system was empty. The next, it was filled with a darkness that consumed the stars. The Reaper ships were not crystalline or elegant. They were voids, geometric shapes of absolute black that seemed to absorb light and hope with equal efficiency. They were the architect's scalpel, the instruments used for the silent requiem, and they moved with the unhurried, inexorable purpose of a terminal disease. There were hundreds of them, a fleet so vast it blotted out the local constellations. Their arrival was silent, yet it screamed in the minds of the Armory's crew, a psychic pressure that made the Lumina commander's earlier projection feel like a gentle whisper. This was the true face of their god, and it was a face of utter annihilation. "They are not communicating," the warden stated, its voice, which for the first time, containing a distinct trace of what could only be described as fear. "They are not here to negotiate or intimidate. They are here to unmake." Elias felt his own hope wither under that oppressive presence. The Armory was a fortress, but it was a fortress built for a different kind of war. Against this, their clever tricks and gravitic weapons would be like throwing stones at a tidal wave. "Then we have to finish this," he said, his voice a low, steady anchor in the rising sea of dread. "Warden, the broadcast was the first act. What's the last? How does this fortress die?" A new schematic filled the command sphere, one of breathtaking, suicidal audacity. It showed the neutron star at the heart of the system, and it showed the Armory's core, not as a power plant, but as a detonator. The Signan's final contingency, the warden explained. A weapon of last resort. We cannot destroy the Reapers with force, as they exist partially outside of normal spacetime, but we can sterilize this region of the galaxy, scour it clean with a force that respects no dimension. The plan was to use the Armory's gravitic arrays to destabilize the neutron star's magnetosphere, causing the star itself to erupt in a focused, directional gamma ray burst, a torrent of energy so powerful it would rip apart the fabric of reality itself. A star scythe that would slice through the Reaper fleet and erase everything in this system from existence, including the Armory. "It will take time to align the core," Jack said, his face grim as he studied the energy flows. "We'll have to absorb their first few attacks. Our defenses won't hold for long." Anya's hands tightened on her console. "I can keep us moving, give them a target that won't sit still. But I can't dodge forever." Elias looked at his crew, at these two broken, forgotten people who had followed him into hell. He had asked them to help him run. Now he was asking them to help him die. He met their eyes, and he saw no hesitation, only a fierce, shared resolve. "Warden," Elias said, "begin the sequence." The battle that followed was not a clash of ships, but a war between physics and metaphysics. The Reapers attacked not with lasers or missiles, but with weapons that bent reality. A wave of spatial distortion washed over the Armory, and a section of the outer lattice simply ceased to exist, not destroyed, but neatly, cleanly erased from the timeline. Anya screamed as she fought the controls, the station lurching as its structural integrity failed. Jax cursed, rerouting power through auxiliary conduits, the lights in the command sphere flickering violently. Another Reaper fired, and a beam of pure causality struck them. For a terrifying moment, the Karen, still docked in the hangar, began to rust and decay at an accelerated rate, aging 10,000 years in 10 seconds before the Discord fields could restabilize and sever the effect. They were being unmade piece by piece. Anya was a demon at the helm, using the station's gravitic drives to execute impossible maneuvers, sliding the entire moon-sized structure between folds in space, using the neutron star's own gravity as both a shield and a slingshot. She made them a ghost by a flicker, a target that was never quite where the Reapers aimed, but each attack that landed took its toll. The Discord fields were failing. The warden's synthesized voice now a clipped damage control report, and the outer hull was breached in multiple sections. Power was failing. Elias stood at the nexus, the final sequence charging around him. The Armory was channeling almost all of its energy into the broadcast core, preparing for the final, cataclysmic burst. The process required a conscious, guiding intelligence to make the final alignment, a task too complex and too delicate for the warden's logic alone. It required a human touch, a sacrifice. A Reaper capital ship, a vast obsidian blade, moved into position directly above them, preparing to deliver the final, killing blow. It was charging its primary weapon, a focus point of non-existence that would erase the armory and its occupants completely. "It's now or never, Elias," Jax yelled, his console exploding in a shower of sparks as the last of the defensive shields gave out. "Anya, I need one last move," Elias said, his voice calm. "Get us directly beneath it, as close as you can." Anya's eyes widened, but she didn't question him. With the last of her power, she sent the dying armory on a final, desperate charge, not away from the enemy, but directly into its shadow. The station shuddered, tearing itself apart as it moved, a monument dying in a final act of defiance. They came to a halt directly under the Reaper's belly, a gnat beneath a boot. "Warden," Elias said, his gaze fixed on the enemy ship above. "It's been an honor." "The honor was ours, Admiral," the ghost of the Signin replied, its voice filled with 1,000,000 years of gratitude. "Thank you for letting us see the dawn." Elias closed his eyes and thought of Lena. He had started this journey to avenge her death, but it was no longer about vengeance. It was about ensuring her death had meaning, that the future she was stolen from would exist for others. He took all his pain, all his rage, and all his love, and he pushed it into the heart of a dying star. The universe went white. From the armory, a lance of pure gravitational force, the concentrated power of a neutron star, struck its core. The star did not explode. It screamed. Its magnetosphere collapsed, and for a single, timeless moment, it became the brightest object in the galaxy. A focused, directional beam of gamma radiation, a scythe of pure creation energy erupted from its pole. The Reaper capital ship, directly above the armory, was the first to die. It didn't explode. It was simply sublimated, its impossible geometry and dark purpose rendered into free-floating atoms in less than a nanosecond. The beam expanded, a wave of incandescent fury, and washed over the rest of the Reaper fleet. The void ships that unmade reality were themselves unmade, their dark hulls vaporized, their alien consciousnesses extinguished by a power as fundamental as the universe itself. The star scythe cut a swath through the system, sterilizing, cleansing, and purifying. And at the epicenter of that cosmic fire, Hades' armory, along with the Karen and the 3 souls who had changed the fate of the galaxy, ceased to exist. Across the galaxy, the nascent rebellion watched. The last transmission from the armory was not of the crew, but a direct feed from its external sensors. Billions of beings, on thousands of worlds, watched as a single point of light defied an entire fleet of nightmares. They saw the impossible weapon fire. They saw the Reaper fleet vanish, and then they saw the signal cut to static as the light consumed its source. The silence that followed was more profound than the architect's peace had ever been. It was the silence of awe, of grief, of a terrible newfound resolve. Admiral Elias Vance, the quiet hydrologist, became a myth. The crew of the Karen became legends. The Requiem's echo had awakened them, but the sacrifice at Hades' armory had united them. They knew the architect was not invincible. They knew the Reapers could be killed, And they knew that the cost of freedom would be paid in fire and blood, and the war was far from over. The architect still had countless fleets, untold power, but it no longer had the lie. It no longer had the illusion of its divinity. All it had left was a long, brutal fight against a galaxy full of beings who now remembered how to hate, how to hope, and how to die for something more than just themselves. Humanity had been given a cage and had mistaken it for a garden. Now, the cage was broken, the garden was ashes, and they were free to build something new in its place. Humanity would have to learn to be its own architect.